Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar. I'm Chloe Rigby, editor of internetretailing.net, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Retail Lessons from China in association with ADGEN and featuring emerging communications. Over the next hour, we'll be hearing from Miles Dawson, Managing Director of ADGEN, and Domenica Di Lieto, Chief Executive of Emerging Communications, with advice and insights for retailers looking at how best to engage with the Chinese shoppers who are expected to visit in record numbers this year. Let me introduce our speakers today. Miles Dawson is a UK Managing Director at ADGEN, the payments platform for leading brands including Facebook, Uber, Spotify, Fatface, Brompton Burkes and L'Oreal, operating across online, mobile and in-store channels. Miles came to ADGEN from Rackspace, where he spent 4 years helping the business go from scale up to publicly listed company. And new to payments, he tells us that he gets a kick out of seeing the impact that payments technology has on business growth and on the shopper. Domenica Di Lieto is founder and chief executive of leading Chinese marketing consultancy Emerging Communications, which works across a wide variety of market sectors and omni-channel in the UK, China and the rest of the world. Domenica worked in print media before becoming an early adopter of commercial digital communication, including developing and selling a digital marketing agency. Since then, she's been at the forefront of pioneering strategy and creativity in Chinese marketing, and in doing so, led Emerging Communications to become an influential European-based Chinese consultancy with offices in Shanghai. Just to let you know that Domenica is joining today from China, where she's currently on a trip, so do bear with us if there's any delay. At the end of today's webinar, we'll move into a Q&A session. Let me explain now how to ask any question you may have. On the control panel on your screen, you'll see a chat box. Send your question through that and we will aim to get to as many questions as we can today. The session is recorded, so I'd remind you that after the webinar finishes, we'll be sending out an email with the link so you can watch it again whenever is convenient for you. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce today's first speaker, Miles Dawson, Managing Director of ADGEN. Miles, welcome to the webinar.
Thanks, Chloe. And thanks everyone for joining us today. It's much appreciated. So where to start? Well, I guess we all know Chinese shoppers present a huge opportunity to UK retailers. And that opportunity just continues to grow. From our recent travels, we realised there's several factors driving this. Firstly, got the recent US-China trade war, which is driving Chinese tourism towards other markets. The UK's acceptance of Huawei and our endorsement of China's Belt and Road strategy is showing the UK to be a friendly environment. And maybe the one snippet of light at the end of the Brexit tunnel, which is that it's potentially paving the way for China's first trade agreement with a Western economy. On top of that, the Chinese have always held a long appreciation for British culture. Downton Abbey, for not my particular favourite, but for some reason is a huge hit over there. And when David Cameron went over there and set up a local social media account, 90% of the comments he received were asking about the next season of Sherlock. So obviously high quality, prestigious British fashion houses with a strong heritage have always been a big lure to the Chinese consumer. However, what we're increasingly seeing is that new dynamic British brands are attracting just as much attention from the key opinion leaders in China. And with the recent fall in and continued fall in sterling, the availability of increasingly frictionless tax-free services from the likes of Global Blue, shopping in the UK is just continuing to get cheaper for the Chinese tourist. So we believe that this continued growth and opportunity can really help retailers offset some of the pain that we're currently seeing with high street closures, and that this opportunity should be grabbed with both hands. I think what we've seen over the kind of last couple of years is that a lot of retailers either aren't fully aware of the full extent of the opportunity, or they're struggling with developing a strategy to really successfully target these Chinese shoppers. So what we want to do with this webinar is try and provide a deeper insight into the Chinese shopper, who they are, where they come from, and obviously how they like to shop. Sorry. Chloe, my slide's not changing. There we go. Sorry, technical glitch. So I'm in Amsterdam as well, just to add further stress testing on the global internet. So first, let's just kick off with some facts and figures that we think kind of really illustrate the opportunity. Chinese retail tourism is expected to increase by about 40% this year, which means it could reach in excess of £1 billion during 2019. And on top of that, the average tourist is spending in the region of just over £5,000 during a single trip to the UK. In addition to the tourism, there's also a growing population of Chinese students at UK universities. This is a group which is often overlooked by UK retailers, but should be a really strong audience to target. Evidence shows that over the last 12 months, the UK has seen an 11% rise in wealthy Chinese students studying in the UK. And on top of this, an incredible 83% of Chinese millionaires are planning to send their children overseas to study in the future, with many of those heading straight to the UK. Students typically stay here for around 2 to 4 years, but increasingly they're remaining on our shores beyond their studies and kind of taking their first roles in UK companies. The beauty of the Chinese student is that, unlike cash-strapped British students that are generally spending a lot of their student loans on boozy nights out, they've got significant more spending power, with a yearly budget of around £29,000. And actually, we didn't really put this on here, but we've got other sources that have claimed that a lot have even higher budgets, with some claiming around $100,000 per year to spend when they're over here. On top of that, those students generally welcome on average 3 visits from friends and families to the UK each year. So for retail brands, this can be a really fruitful demographic to target, not only directly the students, but also the people that are coming over to stay with them. And then finally, in addition to the tourists and the students, we've got the third demographic, which is the Chinese expat. They tend to be between 30 and 50 years old, hold senior white collar jobs, and earn an average salary of in excess of £100,000 a year. Again, evidence is suggesting that this number is growing rapidly as a result of Chinese companies both expanding into Europe, but also, as I just mentioned, the students remaining in the UK to start their careers. In fact, between the last quarter of 2018 and the first quarter of 2019, the number of Chinese millionaires receiving a Tier 1 residential visa soared by 67%. And to obtain a Tier 1 visa, the applicant must have liquid assets of at least £2 million. So again, a really good demographic to target. So, due to the utilisation of mobile devices and the enormous penetration of UnionPay, Chinese consumers like to pay differently. Our recognisable brands like Visa and MasterCard, which we're all used to in the UK and across Europe, is not what they're used to seeing. They predominantly pay with WeChat Pay, Alipay and UnionPay. And generally, they would have access to all 3 payment options. And depending on a number of factors, they'll select whichever is the right payment method for them at that moment in time. I think our belief is that retailers want to successfully target and retain mindshare of the Chinese shopper. It's crucial to support all these payment methods and provide them in a really frictionless way that makes it easy for the shopper to interact with you at the point of checkout. Often we get asked whether you really need to support all 3. I think, as I just mentioned, many Chinese consumers do use all three payment options, switching between them depending on the current financial situation, the price of the goods, any card point incentives that are on offer, or any promotions which may be available through their chosen app. As a result, our suggestion is always to offer all three and to provide your customer with the choice to pay how they want, when they want. And just one quick plug, the only one I promise is that the bonus of working with Adyen is that no additional work is required to configure any of these. It's just as simple to provide or to offer one as it is to offer all three. So since we launched these a few years ago in the UK, we've seen not only a massive rise in usage of the mobile payment, but also there's been a growing trend of retailers embracing the app to increase the brand awareness and ultimately drive footfall into the store. And more on this later from Domenico, who will really discuss the best way to utilize the power of WeChat and Alipay to drive footfall. So as I said, mobile is really important, but whilst the apps provide a great opportunity, you just cannot underestimate UnionPay. It still holds the majority of the market, and their cards represent 70 to 80% of all the transactions we see from Chinese shoppers. So if we just have a look at the scale, let's start with WeChat and WeChat Pay. WeChat started as a messaging app, a bit like WhatsApp. But over the years, it's now evolved into a platform that lets you talk, send messages, store pictures, create databases, and obviously receive and make payments. It often replaces CRM systems in the business world. And in China, it's so ubiquitous that what we found when we were over there is that when people lose their smartphones, they're just as likely to say, I've lost my WeChat, as they are to say, I've lost my phone. So beyond the payment method, WeChat is also a great way to connect to Chinese consumers. WeChat Pay now holds something around 800 million active users, but the WeChat platform itself actually has got over 1.3 billion. So we continue to expect the amount of WeChat Pay users to grow over the coming years. And again, just as you can see on the slide, the scale is crazy, really. When you consider there's only 66 million is the population of the UK, the opportunity within that WeChat Pay base is huge. Next up, Alipay, which is really one of the leading payment and lifestyle platforms in China. It's got great promotional tools and the marketing opportunities for retailers, which include free text broadcast service that can send push notifications to all Alipay users within 200 meters of your store. The interesting thing again about the Chinese consumer is that typically, unlike the British consumer, they're really happy to share their location information and are very receptive to this type of promotion. Again, the scale is really significant with over 1 billion users. It's a really powerful tool to have at your fingertips. And finally, as I say, UnionPay, which really leaves everything in the dust when it comes to number of users. It is the largest card scheme in the world, definitely the preferred payment method of Chinese shoppers traveling to the UK. And there's over 7.5 billion cards in circulation. So there you've got the golden triangle of Chinese payment methods. But we know payments is just one part of the overall customer journey. And just to say, the Chinese shopper typically has 15 touch points before they get to the point of purchase. They love to do lots of research before finally selecting their goods and getting to the checkout. So to get a broader understanding of this Chinese consumer journey and the kind of shopping experience that they expect, we teamed up with Global Blue and Emerging Communications and did a trip to China to really try and understand this firsthand, as well as visiting a number of amazing retail outlets and a number of our technology partners that we work with in China. We also hosted focus groups for both the Chinese consumers living in China and for Chinese students living in the UK. And when we're out there, we also spoke to a number of the top Chinese social media influencers who out there are known as key opinion leaders. So for the rest of the webinar, we're going to explore what we learned, and you'll also be able to find further information in our full report, which will be shared after this webinar. In the coming months, we want to host a number of workshops as well to dive deeper into the findings. So please, you can go online and register for these at www.agen.com/China. So now I'm going to hand you over to Dominica from Emerging Communications, who will talk you through what we learned about the Chinese consumer and how they like to shop. Over to you, Dominica.
Thanks very much, Miles. Good evening, everybody from China. There is a slight lag here on my slides, so my sincere apologies. So let's talk a little bit about the Chinese consumers that you're trying to target in the UK. Miles has talked a little bit about the fact that you are talking about tourists, and also that the student community and expats are extremely important in guiding those decisions for brands for inbound tourists. But what an awful lot of brands cease to realise is just how much research is done by tourists before they come over to the UK to make purchasing decisions. In fact, it takes not only twice as long for Chinese tourists to make decisions on where to shop, and in fact, where to go when they come to the UK. So experiences, shopping, hotels, but also the touch points are also significantly more. I can say firsthand, for just the time that I spend out here in China with my team, that one is very reliant on very many platforms, whether that be forums, whether that be social media, whether that be search, whether that be recommendations from friends. So it's really, really important to understand that you've got to be present where your customers are. And I'm going to talk quite a lot about that. And I'm going to talk about the channels that can be used for each stage of that journey. Just waiting for my slides. Very often, retailers focus on a couple of key peak seasons for inbound tourism. We've got one coming up very, very shortly, which is Golden Week, which is to celebrate China's National Day. And it's where an awful lot of, or actually everybody in China, including expats and Chinese nationals, get a very long holiday. And because their holiday allowance is quite short, they choose that time, that week, that 10-day period, if they take a little bit extra holiday, to actually travel. And that would mean traveling anywhere in the world. And that nearly always involves some form of shopping. So that is always a time of year that we would recommend that retailers target inbound tourists. But there are other times as well, such as Chinese New Year, which is another national holiday. And there is this tourism season of the summer when the kids are on holiday. But the only problem with trying to target Chinese tourists at this time is it's extremely popular and very, very noisy out there. And what retailers and destinations cease to remember or to understand is that there's an awful lot of times throughout the calendar that Chinese tourists will come over to the UK and spend money. Let's not forget the graduation season, June and July, which sees parents and family and friends coming over to congratulate the graduates, and to come over and be very much guided by the new graduate in terms of where they should spend their money. There is also the wedding season, which is June. It is a very, very popular time for Chinese to get married, and is an increased number of destination weddings in Europe. And there is also an awful lot of times, such as Valentine's Day. In fact, there are 4 in China that you can do promotions in store, as well as celebrating things such as Singles Day, London Fashion Week, and so on and so forth. There's some of the times or peak times for shopping, such as I Love You Day and Children's Day, are very much domestic retail opportunities here in China. But the ones that I've highlighted here in blue are good for inbound tourism and very much for destinations and retail. And if you capitalize throughout the year and you try and tailor your offering, and whether that be gift with purchase or whether that be just tailored offerings in store, then that is obviously going to get a lot more traction than ignoring what is perceived as being a very important shopping festival. Just waiting for my next slide to load. The divide between digital or often online in China just simply doesn't exist. In the UK, one still goes into, for example, a retailer, a brand, browses around, buys something, leaves, may well go home, buy online from a similar brand. In China, really, there is no divide. Everything is done on mobile, and so very much the retail environment, and this is one of the things that we shot on film when we were in China in May, and it's very much a big part of the report, is that it's all about experiences. So you need to understand that your Chinese tourists coming over to the UK to shop, to experience, are looking for just that. They're looking for an experience in store. It's not just about shopping. And they will also do an awful lot of browsing ahead of coming into your store. They will have done that. They will show you pictures on WeChat. They'll show you pictures on other forms of social media. They'll point at it, especially if they don't speak very good English, and they will expect that you will then go and find that item. So the research that's done online and the shopping that's done online is part of everyday life in China. I don't go out with a wallet at all. I go out with my mobile, and you'll see two things that everybody has in China: a mobile and a power pack, because you can pretty much do anything with those two things. If you don't have a mobile, you can't even order a taxi. So it just needs to be an understanding that that's what is expected from your audience and from your shoppers. And so totally appreciated that in the UK we don't have such an omni-channel environment, but that is where you should be headed, because that is what the experience or your shoppers expect. So let's just have a look at the journey. So we talked a little bit about Chinese tourists will spend a number of months and will many touch points before they actually book their trip. We've gone from the days where it was all about tour guides guiding purchasing decisions. That used to be the way that it was 7-10 years ago. Now it's all about independent travel. Over 80% of tourists will come over here and independently travel, and they will take guidance, word of mouth guidance, from family and friends living in the UK, or from social media channels, from the likes of Ctrip, which is the largest OTA in China. So it's a bit like a hotels.com and Expedia hybrid. They'll look at things like Mafengor, which is a TripAdvisor equivalent, they'll ask friends, and they'll also look at search engines. And it's really important for brands to have some kind of presence on some of these platforms. Not necessarily all will be relevant, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. And it may be a budgetary constraint anyway to be on all of those channels. But you've got to understand that pre-departure, you need to be seen where your customer bases are hanging out and where they are finding out information. Because if you're not, then it's simply a case that your expected tourists coming over here at peak season and coming over here to see friends and family, they're just going to go to your competitive brands if you don't have a voice in mainland China. I'm going to talk about the various stages, such as pre-departure, on location, in-store, and return home a little bit later on. When we were in China back in May, and also when I'm over here seeing my team, we spend an awful lot of time talking to consumers and also talking to influencers. The influencer market in China is absolutely paramount for an awful lot of brands in order to have a voice and in order to be endorsed by, whether that be a celebrity or a key opinion leader in your sector who already has a following and already has credibility. This is something that's very difficult for a lot of British retailers and brands to get their heads around, because in the UK the PR industry is something that you might pay a PR agency to do, to get you column inches or to get you online coverage. In China, it's very usual practice to have a celebrity endorser, to engage with a number of KOLs, and that KOL to effectively curate the content with the brand in order to become an ambassador of the brand. One thing to note, because this is exceptionally important, and you'll have seen quite a lot of news recently of brands that have done it wrong, is that you must choose the right KOL. You must choose the right fit for your brand, and it must be a KOL that you want, that their followers are the customers that you want. And this comes down to point number 1 of this seminar, which is know who your customer is. Know who you're targeting. What are the tribes you're targeting? Where do they hang out? Because if you don't know this basic information, you haven't done your research, you don't know who your Chinese customers are, and you've made assumptions, it's very difficult to choose the right platforms, the right strategy, and the right bloggers to represent your brand. So that's point number one, know your customers. And point number two is, at the very least, even if you don't do anything else, make sure you have a presence on social media. Social media in China is absolutely paramount to everyday life here. WeChat groups, communicating on WeChat, looking for brand information on Weibo, looking at TripAdvisor equivalents within the travel industry when you're deciding where to stay and where to go. Asking family and friends, joining forums. Social media is part and intrinsic of everyday life. And in fact, we use social media in order to pay for things. WeChat Pay, by way of example, is how I buy bottles of water, my breakfast, order a taxi. And so this is a part of everyday life. And in China, you will find that your consumers, ahead of making their trips, will have done an awful lot of research online, using their mobiles, using social media, in order to get advice, and largely through influencer networks, in terms of where they should shop. It should not be ignored. It's also worth noting that social media, if you don't have a presence on social media, you aren't controlling your brand, and the brand will be controlled by your consumers, who have become your consumers largely by accident, maybe having visited your store. And so to control your brand voice, control your brand name, you have to have your own control over those social media platforms. So let's talk about just the three most important social media platforms. This is by no means the holy grail. We have hundreds and hundreds of social media platforms for all different types of brands, but we're going to talk about the three most important. So Weibo is the largest open platform, social media platform in China. What do I mean by that? It's a little bit of a Facebook, Twitter hybrid, but it's a lot more than that. If you want to find out about a brand, if you want to do research ahead of making a journey to the UK, if you want to follow any KOLs, you want to follow stories, this is where you do it. And so if you are a brand, to control your voice on Weibo, to have your own verified platform, to run your own marketing where you talk about brand, you run promotions, you talk about different festivals, different shopping festivals, like I was talking about earlier. And in certain cases, you can even order through these platforms as well. Some brands would choose to do that. Some brands will choose to do cross-border or in store, or all three. But it's really, really important to note that it's a fantastic platform for engaging with key opinion leaders and bloggers, for doing promotions and seeding those promotions to very discrete customer segments. And also, more importantly, for encouraging your shoppers by creating stories. And if you can't do this yourself in-house, engage an agency. This is what we do for a lot of our brands, in order for that particular brand to engage its customers to create user-generated content, whether that be through competitions or engagement in store, by way of example, so they can talk about what a wonderful experience they've had. That is far more compelling than the brand actually talking about themselves. And it's important to note as well that Weibo has over 300 million searches a day in terms of brands, in terms of destinations to visit, in terms of advice. And so if you don't have a presence on Weibo, when your potential customer is actually searching on Weibo, you just simply will not appear. Or more importantly, if you do appear, it could be in a way that is you as a brand have not chosen to portray yourself. So it's really, really important to have control. Moving on to platform number two, WeChat. We often have customers come to us and say, Domenica, I'm on WeChat. We've been on WeChat, we have a verified platform, we're running marketing through WeChat, but we don't have any customers. Now, it's really important to note that WeChat is a really, really important platform. I live on WeChat, anybody in China lives on WeChat. You can use it to message your friends, you can join groups for different activities and interests. You can follow WeChat in terms of, and brands can use that for marketing. You can pay for things using WeChat. I order taxis, I pay for shopping, I order food. My dinner will be arriving shortly after this webinar that I have ordered online and I pay for via WeChat. However, it's a closed group platform. So if you're advertising to a closed group of 1 or 100 or 200, you're not going to get very far. So WeChat is particularly important when you're building a relationship with a customer that's already come in store, or a customer that you want to become a lifetime value customer. Just simple things like in store having a WeChat QR code so that they follow you when they've left the store, and you can carry on engaging them when they're in the UK, get them to spend more money, and also when they go home. It's absolutely vital. So WeChat is a phenomenal CRM tool. And moving on just to the third most important, sorry, I'm just skipping ahead a little bit here. Little Red Book. And Little Red Book started out as a social media platform. It also started out as a beauty aggregator, and now it is used for many brands and many sectors. Little Red Book is now an e-commerce platform. Very, very important for opinion, very important if you're searching for something, if you want to get advice about what makeup to buy, should I buy those shoes? I've heard of this brand in England, should I shop there? But it really is worth noting that there are so many social media platforms in China that the most important thing to do is to establish who your customers are. And not just women, you need to be segmenting it into finite tribes. So just in the Generation X segment of 5 years, within that segment will be many, many tribes of shoppers. You need to know who those people are, where they hang out, how they behave and how they shop. Then you need to target those channels. I've just chosen 3 of the most important and largest social media. Weibo and WeChat are absolutely vital. But when we work with brands, we work out which channels are going to be the best social media fit for their business. And that also goes for the right KOL fit as well. This is just one of a very odd name, I know, but one of the niche KOLs we work with in Shanghai. And when we spoke to her, this is what she said: if I want to buy something, I go onto Little Red Book as it gives recommendations. Now girls use Little Red Book when they want to learn about particular brand products. It's really important to help me decide what to buy. There's a huge amount of information and it's very comprehensive and accurate. Gone are the days in China where you can just have a presence without curating content. So it's really important to understand that your choice of bloggers, your choice of endorsers is really important, but as is the content you're creating. The content you're curating with that blogger is basically the difference between it just being pure noise on social media and getting an engagement. So really, truly understanding your customers is the most important thing, and then you can engage with them with dynamic content on the right social media platforms. And 67% of cross-border consumers claim that KOLs have impacted on their purchases. I would actually say it's more than that. Certainly when I'm in stores over in China and I'm watching people utilizing their phones, they are literally going in store and saying, I want one of those. I've seen this. And I see exactly the same thing going on in the UK. So it's something that store staff need to be very aware of. And KOL advertising comes in many different forms. It could be curated video content. It could be a partnership and a collaboration. And KOLs now, recently we saw a KOL sell, I don't know, I think it was over 500 minis that were an aquamarine color in a matter of minutes. The same with the lipsticks, the same with shoes. So there are many different niche and what we call super KOLs with large numbers of followers that are used on a day-to-day basis by brands all over the world in order to help with purchasing. Now this is Mr. Bags on the left, and Mr. Bags is probably the most famous bags KOL in the world. He shifts more product than any other KOL, and he also has a price tag to match. He's quite expensive, but this was just him with Tod's, sold 4.77 million renminbi in bags in 1 week. And Austin Lee, who's a beauty KOL, as you can see, it's very common to have male KOLs representing female brands, sold 15,000 lipsticks in 5 minutes. This sort of behavior is very, very common. And now it's gone one step further. You click on the KOL activation and you go straight to the store to buy and to activate. But you can also use KOLs to drive footfall traffic as well. And everybody knows the super KOLs like Austin Lee. Okay, so where does this bring mobile payments and why are we working with ADM? A lot of brands we talk to in the UK are very, very new to China. Now, even if they have stores in China, that will be a separate operation in a lot of instances. And we have brand and retail directors coming to us saying, Domenica, how do I drive footfall into my stores? Our operation in China is completely separate, is run as a separate entity. We want to be targeting tourists, we want to be targeting students. We just simply don't have huge budgets to do so. And in actual fact, we're finding that because the China operation is separate, we just need to have a different strategy. Now, the first thing I would say is you need to have a different strategy for inbound anyway. You need to be very clear who you're targeting in terms of your customer segments. But this is where payments comes in. Mobile payments, as Miles very rightly said, whether that be CUP, Alipay or WeChat Pay, is the way things are done in China. You simply cannot pay in China using Visa, MasterCard or Amex unless you're in either an expat district or you're in a hotel or a restaurant that is actually catering to non-Chinese. So imagine coming over to the UK as a tourist, speaking limited English in a lot of instances, and you've taken advice from maybe student daughter or from a friend, or you've done your research and you're trying to pay for things. You see that little sticker on the window that says you take Alipay, WeChat Pay or China Union Pay. You're like, fantastic, because that's where my money is. Now, not only the exchange rate's better for the Chinese customer, but this is where it gets really clever. You can actually use these mobile payments to actually drive footfall through activations purely targeted to where your customers are at any one time. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about how you use mobile payments to activate traffic. Let's just take Alipay firstly. Alipay is quite well established and set up for marketing. An awful lot of brands we talk to and work with all sorts of payment providers, but we prefer Adyen for a number of reasons, mainly because they're very easy to work with and they have fantastic coverage. And we will speak to a retailer and they'll say, but we've got Alipay, Domenica. Why aren't we getting any footfall? Now, if you actually have Alipay payments, that's one thing, but you actually need to activate your store. You need to create a storefront. It's a bit like being in Westfield shopping centre and not having any frontage at all. If you don't have a storefront within Alipay, your consumers don't know that you have Alipay, and you also can't activate the platform to drive them in store to pay for something. So the first thing we do with brands is to recommend storefronts by location and by country. And the second thing is to create content on the store to make it compelling. And the third is to start creating promotions on those storefronts. We do this regularly with brands. We're doing it with Liberty London, World Duty Free, Anaheim Marsh, Lululemon, to name a few. And what we can do is we can geo-target. We know when your customers are in the local vicinity, and we can send out and push out promotions, gift with purchase, special festival promotions. And it's Golden Week next week, and we're running promotions for a number of our brands to drive footfall for special Golden Week campaigns. So that's point number one in terms of how one can use Alipay. So just a little bit more about that from taking World Duty Free. So we manage the storefronts for World Duty Free, and just one recent campaign called Sensational Summer, we got 22,500 coupon downloads with 176% campaign ROI for World Duty Free, just with one small campaign. Now, bearing in mind that prior to not that long ago, they didn't have a storefront or activations using Alipay, yet they were taking Alipay. So having Alipay in store is one thing. The other thing is to activate your your stores so that they can actually be found by the consumer, and you can run promotions. And then you can run very effective promotions in store. It not only encourages your shoppers to come in when they might have gone to a competitor, but it does one thing that I like as a marketer, and it gives you data. It enables you to see exactly how many of your customers have purchased and downloaded your coupons, so you can see the ROI. WeChat is a little bit less established over here versus what you can do in China. In China, I'm following promotions all the time, scanning QR codes, booking onto whether that be a yoga class, whether that be a particular event. I booked my cinema ticket the other day on WeChat, just turned up and showed my QR code. Very normal to do that. But you can increasingly do this outside of China using WeChat. And again, it's about having the right activations and the right content strategy. And you'll hear an awful lot about WeChat mini programs, and WeChat mini programs are not a new thing. They've been around in China for over 3 years now. It is essentially a program within your WeChat, and it's a really good way to target Chinese tourists and consumers when they're already following you, they're part of the brand, and you want to give them a brand story. You want to sell them more products. And more importantly, for example, if you're a destination, I know ADM work with a lot of destinations across the UK. So it's not just retail here, it's hotels, it's destinations, it's bars. It's making sure that your consumer can effectively engage with you. So a WeChat mini program, the only way I can describe it is a website within a website, but it is so cool. And I use them all the time for the brands that I follow in order to get a better, more engaging experience. And we offer this as a service for a lot of brands. It's just a question of making sure that the WeChat mini program has got the right content for your brand, for who you're trying to target. Unite students. So again, this falls into the university market. This falls into not only universities, but accommodation. We've used many activations for Unite students using mobile payments in order to increase their ROI. It's much easier for a Chinese student or a parent to pay for things using a Chinese payment provider. And also you can then do activations and promotions using WeChat, using Weibo. And we recently did a Weibo and a WeChat campaign to Unite students to encourage them. Whilst it sounds very cheesy, one can be highly emotive in the Chinese market. And we ran a campaign, Warm Up Your Beds, the Singles Day. Now, for those that don't know, Singles Day on the 11th of November was actually originally set up by Alibaba, and it is essentially was set up to treat yourself because you're single. But Alibaba really use it as a massive shopping festival. In fact, more money changes hands in that one day at any day in the calendar year at any other market in the world. Billions of dollars are shifted. And so we did this campaign for Unite in order to make it highly emotive and engaging on social media, and also using mobile payments so that we could track downloads and we could track the measure the campaign, and it was highly successful. And in just 2 days, they achieved over 1,748% sales KPI, and they're going to do something similar this year. So key takeaways from my standpoint is be strategic. Nobody has a bottomless pit of budget. Make sure you're choosing the target segments wisely, do your research, talk to your customers in store that are Chinese, find out what they want, find out who they are, and target your marketing according to where they're hanging out. So try not to throw mud at a wall, hope it's going to stick, be highly strategic. The other thing is showcase your brand story. So many brands have got the most incredible heritage story, and Chinese consumers want the real thing, they want the real deal, they want the UK story, they want the European story. So talk about it and make sure you're controlling your brand voice by creating that content either with your agency or yourself as a brand, and not allowing your distributors and your agents to own your brand voice. And thirdly, make the customer experience #1 priority. Offer mobile payments, utilize those payment platforms in order to drive promotions and engagement, leverage existing fan base and engage with KOLs, and have fun with it, and use that data that you've got from your mobile payment platforms to see what's working, and then leverage those promotions again. Thank you very much. Chloe, over to you.
Thanks very much for a really informative session, both of you. We've got a number of questions in already, but before we start in on our Q&A session, a quick reminder to anyone else who has a question on how to ask it. On the control panel on your screen, there's a chat box. Write your question there and press send. And if your question is directed to one person in particular, please do mark that. And we'll aim to get to as many questions as we can today. So, first question. We've been considering marketing to Chinese shoppers for some time, but we don't know where to start. What's the best way to approach it? Domenica, do you want to start with that one?
It's a very open-ended question.
It
And it's the
is.
question it's the question we get asked the most, because there is a big fear around China, which I don't understand, because it's the same as any market. Who are your customers? So you know who your brand is, you know who you represent, you know who your European customers are. Find out who your customers in China are, and also leverage the cheapest and best way to do it is to leverage the customers you already have in the UK and ask them, do research. If you have a WeChat account, brilliant, you can do research through that. Do research in store, find out why they love your brand, find out why they don't go to your brand and spend money, and know who the tribes are you're targeting. Once you know that, you know where they hang out. That's where you should concentrate your marketing. Absolutely essential to have a verified Weibo platform and to be controlling your brand voice there and leveraging KOLs. Absolutely vital in store to collect QR codes, so to have a QR code, your official WeChat account all over the store where people follow you and you can carry on engaging with them. There is little or no point collecting email addresses. There's nothing more annoying for a Chinese customer, or even worse, business cards. So you need to be collecting WeChat, and you need to be coming up with creative promotions that are relevant to that particular audience at the time of the year that they're going to spend money. Take advice, work with somebody that can help you. And if you have in-store Chinese speakers, as most brands do now, especially in large cities, then ask them. All too often I'm amazed when I speak to CMOs and retail directors and they haven't actually spoken to their Chinese speaking staff to get data, to get insights as to what could be improved in store, and also how to better treat Chinese customers. So be aware how to sell to them, not being too pushy, and all the cultural nuances that go with shopping. And lastly, take and offer mobile payments and then leverage those platforms, especially Alipay, which is so effective. Have a storefront, run promotions and collect that data. Yes, in a nutshell.
That certainly sums it up. And Miles, do you have any related thoughts on where to start in the Chinese market?
Nowhere near as much as Dominica. No, I think, I mean, from a payment perspective, I think it's quite, I think it's, for us, it feels quite simple, really. You've just got to have those payment options. Where we've deployed them with retailers in the UK, we've really seen an uptick on conversion, both online and in store. And then I think, as Dominica says, the power then is just embracing what you can do with Alipay and WeChat to drive footfall.
That's great. Thanks there, Miles. Second question, do different Chinese consumer demographics require separate marketing campaigns? We've only got a limited budget, but we want to attract students as well as tourists. Domenica, what do you think?
Oh, right. This comes down to targeting tribes, as I said, and not just lumping Chinese consumers into great big groups. If you've got a limited budget, I'd start with students. The reason I would do that, as Miles rightly said, an average Chinese student not only has high disposable income, they will welcome friends and family over 3 times a year to the UK, and they become not only the brand advocate, they become the influencer to that group to say where to shop. So if you've got a limited budget, you can still use Chinese platforms to target those demographics in the UK. You can use UK-based Chinese KOLs, still use Weibo, WeChat, and still do marketing to those groups, and just cover those segments. Get those students to become ambassadors and advocates of your brand. When you have actually proven that that works and you've got the ROI, you can then extend your marketing to targeting your customer tribes that are tourists in market China. The reason I say to do it like that is, for example, to do a campaign and to do a promotion on Ctrip, which is the largest OTA in China, is expensive. And to do Baidu search campaign is only going to work if you've already got brand presence and you've already got demand for your brand. And so you are then looking at much higher budget. So I would start with what we call low-hanging fruit, and then I would almost have a risk versus investment approach. So the more income you can get from the Chinese student demographics and tribes, then you can then work your way up to tourists, because it's still going to be income for the brand from the inbound market.
That's great. And you said that both Weibo and WeChat were absolutely vital, but which would be the best to use, maybe the first place to start?
They're totally different. And I think that's the key takeaway from today. WeChat is a Stanley knife, really, of everything from a WhatsApp to a PayPal to a telephone to a wallet. And it really is only as good as the followers you've got within your WeChat group. And you're not going to have anybody in your WeChat group if you don't do any marketing. You can do marketing directly on WeChat to grow your followers, but it is expensive. So if budget is an issue, you need to also have Weibo to have a presence, to have outreach, so that people can search for your brand, and so that you can engage with KOLs on an open platform, and more importantly, so that your customers can be encouraged to comment and that is visible to all. So I would actually say you kind of need the both in parallel. They have very, very different roles to play in the marketing mix. If budget is an issue, I'd start with Weibo and possibly add WeChat later, but even if it's just having WeChat official account with some marketing going through it, so that you can encourage shoppers in store or at your destination to follow you, that is the bare minimum I would recommend for that market.
That's great. Excuse me. Another question. A lot of the Chinese market activity, e.g. Tmall and JD, seems to be coupon, discount, shopping allowance driven. Are percentages off the only way to attract Chinese consumers, or is there a way around it? Dominica, can I stay with you and then ask Miles that question?
Absolutely. This is the biggest challenge that luxury brands face. Because if you're a luxury brand and you don't discount, there is no reason to discount with the Chinese customer either. Yes, Tmall, 11.11, Taobao is really a more lower value and quite a B2B platform anyway. Stick by your guns. Your brand is really, really important, but offer gift with purchase, offer wraparound services, offer things in store. Just don't discount. You can still do that. That's still appealing to the customer. And again, what one offers is got to be appealing to your customer groups that you have identified will buy your product and brand. That's the critical piece. If you are a luxury brand, you're not going to discount, so there's no point. But this goes down to what channels one should be advertising on and be on. And it may be that Tmall is not the right platform for you, and you're better off being on Little Red Book, or you're better off having standalone e-com, or you're better off doing cross-border. So actually, I would say this comes down to the customers. Who are you targeting? What's your brand values and your brand voice? And you have to make sure that you don't water down your brand. So just don't discount if you're not a discount retailer and you're a luxury brand, but choose the right platforms to be present on and choose the right channels, targeting the right consumers. It's that simple, but it is a very common question from brands that we get.
That's great. Thanks, Dominica. And Miles, any thoughts on ways to attract Chinese consumer?
I think the only thing I'd add to that around discounting is, but if the tax-free services that are available now to the kind of those Chinese tourists are huge. So your goods are already almost discounted 15 to 20% by the VAT rebates that they get. So, for them, there's some real bargains to be had just through that.
That's a really good point, actually, Miles. And also added to that, bear in mind, it is about 40% more expensive to buy in China than it is in the UK. And if you then add the currency situation we now have, it is extremely attractive a destination right now for shopping. So if you can create the experience in store and the service in store, talk about that on social media and online, that's really, really important. And make sure that what you are offering is going to be attractive to your shoppers, then you don't need to discount.
And I guess from just throwing this out there, but from a marketing perspective, the tax-free service is not only benefiting the shopper, but it's generally acts as a revenue stream for the retailer as well. So
Yeah.
maybe there's a conversation to be had with your CFO about where that revenue stream's being deployed, because the more you can invest it, the more Chinese tourism purchases you can get in store, the more the rebate. And so, potentially you can drive revenue in two different ways by marketing in the right way.
Great.
Absolutely. Agreed.
That's lovely. Got one more question. Do we need to have a separate, fully translated website to help online purchases? Domenica, I'm imagining that's a yes.
That's from Richard, isn't it, Richard? I've just found the questions. Essentially, Richard, what I would say is this: it depends on what you're trying to do. The ideal scenario is one would have a fully functioning e-commerce solution, whether that be through WeChat, or whether that be through a mini program, or whether that be through cross-border, or whether that be through Tmall. So if this goes back to the basics, what are you trying to do and who are you and who are you targeting? So for example, if you are targeting inbound Chinese shoppers and tourists, you need to be on social media, and you need to make sure everything is in Mandarin and that it's all relevant and it's all resonating and all those things I said. If you are actually selling to Chinese shoppers in China, or in this seminar is more about inbound, absolutely crucial. And then it's a question of, what platform am I going to sell my products on? Is Tmall right, or is it too cluttered and noisy? Should I have standalone ecom? Have I got enough followers that I could have my own WeChat store? And that's a separate conversation, which I'm more than happy to have on a separate note after the webinar, because that's about ecom strategy. Then it comes on to just pure play brand websites. Now, brand websites have a part to play in supporting any activity for the shopper, so that they can find out more information. But there are a lot of issues around accessing of content in China, and it's actually getting worse, VPNs being blocked, and also the firewall, meaning that if you do have a fully translated branded website, it's got to be visible, it's got to load quickly. That's actually more costly than having the website developed. So there are a number of things, so there isn't a clear-cut answer. It would be great if you can, but it really depends on whether you're doing cross-border, whether you're selling in market, or whether you're targeting purely inbound tourists, as to what solution I would suggest, whether that be landing pages, a standalone e-com site, a third party, or a brand website. One thing I would say, which is a really good measure for those new to the market, is to make sure that your verified official WeChat account has a really good customized menu, where you have all the information such as shopping hours, all the information such as where to buy, your outlets, whatever that happens to be. It acts as a mini site. That's a good stepping stone, as is having maybe a WeChat mini program, but it really depends on where the end purchase is going to be, whether it's through Tmall or whether it's directly to you in cross-border, as to what I would advise is the best course of action. It's a little bit more complicated than a simple answer, I'm afraid to say.
That's fine. I think you definitely answered the question there, though. So thank you very much. That's the last question we had time for today. So I'd like to thank both of our speakers today, Miles Dawson, UK Managing Director of Adyen, and Domenica Di Lieto, Chief Executive of Emerging Communications. Thank you both very much for being with us today.
My absolute pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.
Brilliant. And thanks to our listeners for tuning in and for your questions. As always, we'll follow up by email with the link to the on-demand webinar, which you'll be able to listen again to at your convenience. So thank you and goodbye.
Bye-bye.